I declare open this hearing of the Senate Environment and Communications Legislation Committee inquiry into the Nature Positive Bills 2024 and related bills.
The Biodiversity Council considers strong laws to protect nature as the keystone in a broader strategy to stem biodiversity loss and to create a stable and prosperous future for us all. Significant law reform is needed and every second counts. We therefore support the government's intention to reform laws under its Nature Positive Plan. We support the establishment of an EPA and EIA, along with the key reforms in these bills, including enhanced compliance and enforcement powers and a biennial State of the Environment report. However, as experts in biodiversity, we see that the reforms as currently proposed in the three bills in front of us do not go nearly far enough to establishing these bodies, EIA and EPA, as strong national institutions, let alone achieve genuine, lasting and system-wide protection for nature.
It does seem to me that this is a package of legislation without any friends.
If I might add,
yes, please.
Senator Hanson-Young, I think we've had a long consultation over 2 or 3 years around what should be in both a revised set of environmental laws and critically around environmental standards. And I think we've had good opportunity to represent what should be in those standards, and I think that's reflected in the comments that we've made today, outcomes-based standards following on from very clear guidance from Graham Samuel's review of the EPBC Act. The disappointing thing is that the substance around the standards and indeed even the requirement under law to have the standards and have them legally enforceable has been delayed, indefinitely or to this third tranche, and that's the great disappointment for us. And that's why we can't see how these proposals under the current bills are going to make any substantive change to our trajectory and to stem biodiversity loss, because they would depend so much on what remains to come in the third tranche.
So, in essence, then, there are things in these bills which may be helpful if you had laws that were actually there to protect nature.
Yeah, I think one of the most important things, and it might not jump out as a really large part of this package, but there's a proposed definition of nature positive, and we've heard so much about nature positive since, that the Nature Positive Plan is the framing under which all of these reforms are occurring. Being clear about what that actually means is potentially going to be a really helpful thing, because that can set out what we need all of these pieces of legislation to be achieving, the outcome that they need to be heading towards. The problem is that the current definition that's proposed is incomplete and currently could sort of mean anything at all. It doesn't have a baseline year against which nature positive is to be measured, and it doesn't even make clear that there will be a baseline year. It could, hypothetically, be a trajectory. So we wouldn't want to be saying that nature positive is merely for things to be declining, just not quite as fast as they are now. But at the moment, that's possible with the definition that's been put here. So I think there are some elements in these bills that, with the changes that we've proposed, could provide some really useful guidance for the remainder of the package. But at the moment, they really leave the door open for continued decline of our environment.
So, the government has argued that this is all about nature positive, and what you're telling me is that that term doesn't even mean anything in these bills.
Not yet. Not without a baseline year and a target year by which we're going to achieve this outcome. Setting an outcome like that would help enormously in framing, and it will be the test. Surely we all agree that that is the test of these reforms, that we want to turn around the decline in our environment.
Most stakeholders from right across the spectrum have put to me that this is very much cart before horse. We've got an entity that is being established to administer the same laws. Is there any way in which these bills can be retrofitted with everything you've asked for if we're not going to deal with Tranche 3? Is not Tranche 3, which, as far as I could recall, something that was supposed to happen before the end of last year, 2023, isn't that what you're really after? You want those laws presented so you know exactly what it is this entity is going to be administering first? So my question really is any amount of tinkering around the edges going to make these acceptable to you? these
I
laws?
think there's a number of amendments that could be made right now, that could be introduced, that would actually put a very positive and meaningful first step package, or second step, sorry, we're at step 2 of 3, package on the table to actually start to deliver meaningful and substantive outcomes for matters of national environmental significance. I think there needs to be genuine consideration of what actions, not commitments, what actions can be taken now to improve the package of bills on the table to start to turn around the trajectory.
And can I add to that? Because, yeah, you're absolutely right. We would love to see more about Tranche 3. We would love to see what the timeline on that is. But this is urgent. And I think one of the most important proposals that we've put forward in our submission is that this is an opportunity to enshrine a required outcome in the EPBC Act while we await those further changes. If we have an outcome requirement for matters of national environmental significance, so that any decision made under the Act leaves them better off, not worse off, then a lot of other changes can flow from that requirement, even while we await the full set of Tranche 3 reforms.
And in particular, Senator, if the EPBC Act were amended now, as is quite possible, to insert a head of power for the Minister to make standards and to require that decisions comply with standards, then the Minister and the Government could get on with the job of making those standards and changing and improving the existing regime while the Stage 3 amendments continue to be developed. So, yes, it is possible to make an improvement now, even though it doesn't go as far as we'd like.
And we could enshrine a proper definition of nature positive that lines us up with our global commitments, that lines up with globally accepted definitions of nature positive, that sets a very clear baseline against which we will measure outcomes for nature, and also sets targets for what we want to achieve by 2030 and 2050. That could be included in the amendments.
You know, except we are where we are, but are we really just going to say, OK, well, we've got an administration body, an enforcement body, an information body to legislate, let's tack on through the consequential amendment bills the things we want to see changed in the Act after 2 years of consulting on this? Are we really happy with that?
You'll see reflected in our submissions our frustration at the timeline, of course, and I don't think anybody's going to argue against that. But we're here to try and make the most of the situation that we're in with the most positive and constructive amendments that we can possibly suggest and push through.
All right. So terms and conditions apply for passage of the bills before this committee. Can I go then to perhaps for the Biodiversity Council, page 4 of your submission? As I understand it, under the proposed laws, there is the capacity for environmental approval decisions to be delegated to people in agencies outside of the EPA. Are you familiar with that concept within the...
We're just concerned that that's a possibility, that there's some ambiguity in the drafting of the bill as it is.
Yes.
And we would like to see that ambiguity removed.
And again, have you communicated with the government about, frankly, if we are establishing an entity that's supposed to be independent from government and make decisions that are centrally aimed at improving the environment, if we delegate to someone in another agency, like, I don't know, NOPSEMA or whatever, that would be a glaring concern for anyone at this witness panel now, surely.
If you have a CEO of an EPA that's appointed by a minister and essentially answering directly to the minister rather than to an independent board that properly represents interests and stakeholders across the community, then you will see decisions that are under undue influence of the minister. We don't get away from essentially the ministerial discretion that we currently see. We really need to see, and we've set out very clearly in our submission, the nature of the EPA governance and structure that we would want to actually see to generate that independence. So I think there's no reason. We've got great precedent for this. It exists in the States. It exists in New Zealand. There are good models for how this could work. We just need to see amendments to the current bills to actually reflect that best practice.
All of you have suggested extensive amendments to the bill around matters that really go to Stage 3. And none of those, as I understand, have been subject to any public consultation. So what are your thoughts around how to expedite that process and get something happening where there hasn't been any public consultation on the ideas?
Well, I would say the ideas have been widely discussed, including by the government, for some years, going right back to the Samuel Review. The clarity around the requirement for an outcome-based approach, so that we can enshrine the requirement for our threatened species to be recovered, for our landscapes to be repaired. So the idea of nature positive is something that's been discussed for a long time, and all we're doing is proposing that be clarified in the current bills. So the definition is in one of the bills before us right now, and for that outcome that we have already agreed to through our international commitments on threatened species, preventing extinctions under the Convention on Biological Diversity, simply for that to be enshrined in the Act in the meantime while we await Tranche 3.
These ideas have been articulated and socialised through the Nature Positive Plan, a document, a policy document that we've had for a couple of years now. It's not that we would be dumping brand new ideas into amendments. All we would be doing is trying to create that clarity in the amendments that speaks directly to the words that have been stated in policy for years now, and that reflect the commitments that we've made on the global stage.